Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whatever it may be for you. Good to see you again. We're talking this week about Immanuel Kant and his contribution to the history of philosophy. It can't be his contribution can't be overstated. He has a huge contribution to the history of Western thought in really all the disciplines. I mentioned philosophy here just a second ago, but really you could talk about that for his impact in theology as well, and any discipline of history and all of those types of things. Immanuel Kant's absolutely huge. Let me just situate him very quickly in the history of ideas so that you know where to place him and where to put him. So he comes into this debate between the empiricist and the rationalist. You may or may not remember from your HOL1 course or from other philosophy courses that maybe you've taken so far. But in the 17th century, modern philosophy is born, modern epistemology is born. You have people like Descartes that we saw just a week or so ago, where Descartes is arguing for a way of gaining knowledge that starts with reason, and he gets these basic foundations that he thinks he can start from. And so Descartes is a rationalist, and rationalists are those people that base their knowledge primarily on reason, not experience. Then, of course, you have empiricists like John Locke that we also saw, and John Locke bases it off of experience. He says that the mind is tabula rasa. You remember that. So it's all knowledge comes through experience and observation and things like that. So you have this debate between the rationalist on the one hand and the empiricist on the other hand. And really from Kant forward, we stop having that debate because he kind of brings them together in a way to talk about our knowledge. His famous work is The Critique of Pure Reason, which you're reading a little part of. And I'll just go ahead and tell you, this may be the most difficult reading that you do for this course. It might even be one of the more difficult readings that you do in the entire history of Ideas program. The good news is we're not having you read a ton of it, so you should be able to navigate that pretty quickly and pretty well. I think you'll be fine. Let me kind of hit the highlights of what you'll be reading and to talk about some of these things here for just a moment. So first of all, we have to talk about the relationship of faith and reason. This has been an ongoing debate for a couple thousand years, especially through the end of the patristic period, into the medieval period, where the Western world thought that we could reason our way to God in some way. That's not to say that they made reason the foundation of our religious knowledge, but it is to say that they thought that the world made by God would point to God, and that through proper thinking and proper exploration of the world, we would be able to find God. We would be able to find evidence of God. And so reason and science ultimately were seen as tools that we could use to bring us to some, at least partial knowledge of God. Hence, natural theology thrived, this ability to say things about God from nature and argumentation and all of that. Well, Kant rejects all of that. Okay, he says that no, these arguments for God's existence, they don't really work, and for that matter, reason and science don't really give us these conclusive proofs for God's existence. He basically thought that there was this sort of metaphysical line, right, with all the physical stuff down here, and we can know about tables and chairs, and we can know about rocks and things like that, but ultimately anything up above this metaphysical line up here like God, those are things that we can't know. Because for Kant, to know something, you had to have sense data for it. The two things that he thought you had to have for knowledge were sense data, number one, and a mind that processes that information in such a way that you can have knowledge of it. And so, since sense data is necessary to have knowledge of anything, your sense data can't cross that metaphysical divide and get up there. In short, you and I can't reach up and grab God by the ankle. We don't get emails from him. We don't see him or touch him or taste him or smell him or any of those types of things. And so since we don't have sense data for God, we just can never know anything about God. And so he thinks that ultimately reason and science and all of these things aren't going to help us at all in our knowledge of God. So there's a break here on the relationship of faith and reason. He also thinks because of that, God in general just can't be known. You can believe about God, and theological matters and religious matters can be objects of belief, but they can never be objects of knowledge themselves, because again, that requires that sense data. Now, what that's going to leave with Kant is that he's basically an agnostic. He was not hostile to God like other folks were, but he was hostile to organized religion per se. That he was hostile at times to the church and things like that, but he wasn't hostile to God per se. He just had his suspicions as to whether or not we could do anything about it like that. Another thing to really point out about Kant is just the implication of his epistemology for knowledge in general. There's no way to do Kant justice in a little 10-minute video, but we just want to try to introduce you here today. Essentially, to go back to something I said just a few moments ago, for someone to know something, to have knowledge, Kant thought that there were at least these two criteria. Okay, number one, to know anything about something, you had to have data for it. And then second of all, you had to have a mind that could process and organize that sense data and form structural knowledge, and so that you could now have it. So for example, if I want to have knowledge of the football, then I first must have sense data of it, meaning I touch it and I feel it, see it's brown. I hit it with my hand, I hear it makes a certain sound, and so I have some sense data that my mind has. But my mind has to take all of that sense data, has to organize it and structure it, and to create, if you will, a representation of a football. All right, so what that means is basically anything that you and I know about has been processed through a mind, right? But that's going to raise all kinds of questions in the history of philosophy about how well our perceptions of things line up with the way the world really is. And so there's going to come a lot of questions about this in epistemology, is whether you and I ever really know anything. And Kant famously said, we don't know the noumena, which is the thing itself, but rather what we do know is the phenomena, the appearance of the thing. So for Kant, religious knowledge of God is not possible. But even ordinary objects like a coffee cup or a football, even for ordinary objects, what we know, what you and I know of these things, is not the things themselves, but rather the appearance of the things, how it is that they appear to us. So all you ever really know, according to Kantian philosophy, is the way things look and the way things appear. And there's going to be a whole tradition that flows out of Kant. And ultimately, while it looks like on the surface Kant is saying no to theological and metaphysical knowledge, but yes to all this other kinds of knowledge, we have reason to be suspicious of any kind of knowledge whatsoever after Kantian philosophy. So anyway, that should give you a little quick update and or a briefing on what you're about to read. Again, it's going to be a difficult reading, but you'll be fine. Don't worry. Just plow through it, and we'll have opportunity to discuss it later. Hope this helps. We'll see you the next time.